I mean, haven't you ever had a policeman do this? Yeah, I can remember one time I had a policeman give me a ticket, and I told him plainly that it wasn't right, and he wouldn't listen. And by golly, I think this could happen. I think we need to send a message to those policemen. Now, you know, if the guy's out here and it's a drunk driving rap and he run 3 people off the road and this guy has been doing this for a long time, I'm not suggesting to you that you have to turn every defendant loose and vote not guilty. And I'm not telling you you have to vote guilty. You might be on a murder trial somewhere. Take a look at this Doherty case in Malloy. Those people were guilty of sin. They went in and they broke into a company. It was burglary, and they stole their records and went out in the parking lot and they burned them up. I think probably if I'd have been on the jury, I'd have voted guilty. I don't think they asked the right question, see? I think if they had asked the right question, I might have voted not guilty, but I mean, if you're just going to break into some office, I don't care if you break into a bank up here and burn Federal Reserve notes, you're probably doing the world a great service. But you know, burglary is burglary, and bank robbery is bank robbery, and I don't think I'm going to sit here and justify or vindicate somebody for robbing a bank and robbing a Circle K store. Robbery, murder, rape, and pillage, those are common law crimes. But when we have an opportunity to sit on a jury, let's get on the jury. Let's not sit there and get ourselves bumped off of it because we don't have enough intelligence to sit there and keep our mouths shut or make the right responses. And that's exactly what you're trying to get out of those jurors, is the right response. Now, let's suppose you want to know whether this guy is a conservative or not. Let's just take an example. You know, a little thinking, you know, you can figure out whether this guy is a conservative. What do you do for a living? Oh, I work for the government. I said, what do you do there? Oh, I'm with the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. And what do you do? Well, I'm a graduate from the University of California at Berkeley in social sciences, and I'm a caseworker. Okay? Well, doesn't that kind of tell you the kind of juror, you know, politically anyway? I'd say, yeah, there's a radical Kennedy liberal Democrat who's going to vote the entire government line any time there's a question of how to vote. Now, on the other hand, you got another man there, and what do you do, sir? No, I'm a doctor. I see, and how long have you been a doctor? About 25 years, and what do you do? I'm a surgeon, and blah, 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 and now, you can't ask the guy how much money do you have in the bank and things like that. But if you want to find out typically about his financial background and et cetera. Now, how does are you a licensed? Yes, I'm licensed. And do you deal with the Medicaid program? And yes, I deal in the Medicaid program and with the insurance programs. And yes, I do. And how do you feel about Medicaid insurance? Now, if that draws an objection over here, well, wait a minute. One of the charges is no insurance, and I want to know whether or not this doctor is pro-insurance or anti-insurance, you see? And you've got a right to ask that question. But if you find out that he's a welfare state liberal, yeah, I think Medicare's good, and I think it's wonderful, and I think that the old folks really need Medicare, and gosh, I don't know what the world would be like if we didn't have Medicaid and Medicare. Why, people would starve to death, and one thing and another, and go without medical services, one thing and another. On the other hand, you know, he might give you a comment like, well, I don't care too much for Medicaid. Well, that pretty well tells you, you know, that he's anti-insurance, doesn't it? You see, the type of questions you ask is simply a matter of the old story, as I've said before, is reason, logic, and common sense. Now, one time we had a prosecutor who said, well, that Mr. Johnson over there's got 84 questions, and he's just over here going down the list asking 84 questions. At some point in time, he's got to shut up. See? Thank you, Your Honor. I'm glad that Mr. Smith over here, the prosecutor, asked that question because, as I've said before, you know, I'm just new in the courtroom, and I thought that in order for me to ask intelligent and sensible questions of the jury, that I ought to write them down. Now, this particular prosecutor had seen me in court a number of times, and he knew that I worked off of a list, and he knew that the jury selection was going to take 6 or 8 hours, and he knew what my stratagem was, and so did the judge. And this guy was in there for his first time, and he didn't make the right rebuttal. And what happened was, he objected, and he's just using Mr. Gordon's prepared list that take up a lot of the court's time, and so the guy's sitting there. Do you have any response, Mr. Jones? Well, I think I got to have a right to ask the jury some questions, and I think I'm doing all right. You see, his rebuttal didn't set the record. And that record, remember, the tape's going round and round. Every assertion or allegation is assumed to be true unless you say, no, it's not true. See, if the prosecutor says, hey, that Gordon's wearing a green necktie. Now, Mr. Gordon, do you have any rebuttal? No, I guess not, Your Honor. Okay. Let the record show that Mr. Gordon's wearing a green necktie. The judge doesn't even have to say that. He said I'm wearing a green necktie. I had my opportunity to rebut, and I shut up. So far as the record, when an appeals judge up the line looks at the case, he's going to have to assume that this tie isn't blue. It's some other color. He may sit there and say, I don't know what color it is. Now watch what happens. Your Honor, Mr. Gordon, let the record show Mr. Gordon's wearing a green tie today. Thank you, Your Honor, and I'm glad you brought that subject matter up. I'd like the court to take a look at this tie and take a look at the color spectrum that's coming through the windows. And recognizing, of course, that color spectrums can sometimes deceive, and this can be especially true, whether or not a person is wearing green or blue or red can be deceptive, and sometimes when people are colorblind, and there could be some colorblind members on the jury or spectators or participants in the courtroom, and perhaps even the judge or the prosecutor could be colorblind. You know, if you've ever been to Toastmasters, I don't know how many of you have, but one of the first things that I think we ought to do at lesson 1 is to tell everybody, go to Toastmasters and start in the morning. One of the things I find that patriots have a problem doing, you know, and blue-collar workers, is that they can't walk, talk, and chew gum at the same time. And if you can't talk, boy, let me tell you, you know, you really have a handicap. And I'll tell you, in the Toastmasters Club or a spokesman's club of some type, here's what you get. There's a lesson in there called impromptu. And that's where somebody just gets up and says, Mr. Gordon, we'd like you to speak for 6 minutes on your blue tie. And you got to, you know, it's your job. You have to stand up now, and you have to give a 6-minute speech, and you have to cover all of the pertinent subject matters of it. And I know that people say, well, I can't talk in public, and, you know. Well, of course you can't talk in public. It's because you don't ever talk in public. Most of you over there can't fly an airplane. Well, of course you can't fly an airplane. You've never flown in one before. I get tired when I hear people say, well, I just can't do this, you know. I just can't do that. I can do any damn thing I put my mind to, and so can you or anybody else. Trouble is, everybody's lazy and they don't want to. Now, let me illustrate this fact and this point again. I don't care what that prosecutor says over there. He can say the sky is yellow and that the moon is green cheese and that my tie is green or yellow. I don't care. I can sit up there and talk for 5, 6, 8, 10 minutes about blue neckties and people being colorblind, and when I get all through, I want the court and the record to clearly note that I don't believe for a moment that my tie is green. I believe this tie to be blue, and I am going to stipulate that this tie is blue. And I demand that this court recognize that the defendant is wearing a blue tie. And I demand that the record so reflect that this is a blue tie, and that if the prosecutor wants to contend and maintain his contention that I'm wearing a green tie, I demand that the record clearly reflect that this is a contested issue of fact, and that this issue needs to be submitted to the jury for a clear and unequivocal determination as to the facts. And if it's a matter of law, Your Honor, then I demand that this court give us a judicial determination immediately before we go forward in picking the jury or selecting the jury as to whether this tie is green or blue, so that I may make the appropriate objection timely that I not waive my rights. And by the way, I demand all of my rights at all times, including my right to wear a blue tie if I so desire. And the fact that this is a blue tie and that my right to wear a blue tie is an inalienable right that I claim under my rights to life, liberty, and property. And that this is property, and that this blue tie is, as a matter of fact, property, and therefore it is absolute, inalienable, and allodial freehold property. Thank you, Your Honor. And then I would sit down. I mean, you know, Billy Graham one time said that he couldn't talk, so he went out and talked to trees. And that's all it really requires. It just requires a little practice. And to show you how important this is, we went to court the other day, and there was a fellow that's been to school here, and he wrote beautiful paper, and he laid his entire argument out in paper. And it was a simple show cause hearing, and he knew that he was going to lose at the show cause hearing. But it drew about 50 people. And you know, if I have an audience of 50 people, I would just really feel that I had let everybody down if I didn't get up and make a good fight of it. Just because you know you're going to lose round one doesn't mean that you can't knock your opponent's teeth out and bloody his nose and black his eyes. You'll always walk out of the courtroom with your opponent black and blue and bloody. Remember the story I told you about the kid that was in the ag shop, and he came over and he punched me in the arm, and I knocked him down and cut his lip, and he just went on to thrash me soundly. And he came back the second day, and he did the same thing, and I busted him in the mouth again. But the third day, we didn't have any more problem. And that's one of the more important things that you have to keep in mind. That prosecutor is trained to do nothing but object, and to compel you and to force you and to cause you to lose your train of thought, to confuse you. It's a game to him. It's like chess, and so he's going to move his men around on the board. If you want to break that prosecutor from sucking eggs on all of these objections that he's making, and he's going to start right off on voir dire about the third question you ask that juror, objection, Your Honor. Why, this guy's over here doing this and such, and I just kind of sit there like this. At some point, the dummy's got to shut up, right? And when he shuts up, that's when I take the floor. And boy, when I take the floor, I've got a right to rebuttal if it takes a half an hour. Now, the judges get a little smart, you know. After about 5 minutes, they'll stop me and they'll say, "Excuse me, Mr. Gordon, I think I can resolve this without any further argument or oral argument or delay. Mr. Gordon, I'm going to go ahead and allow you to ask that question." Oh, well, thank you, Your Honor. Excuse me, Your Honor, I've lost my train of thought. Every time the prosecutor objects and we have to go through all of this verbal dialogue, I kind of forget where I was. I'll just start back here at question 1 again. How did you say you pronounced your last name? Johnson? How did you spell that? Johnsson? Okay. And did you say you were married, Mr. Johnson? Oh, no, you're not. Oh, okay. Well, I guess I don't have to ask you how many children you have, then, do I? Okay, and were you a native of Idaho? Oh, you came from New York. Oh, that's right. I think I've got that written down here, New York. Now, do you see what you've done? Now, if the prosecutor can object and disorient you, and if the judge can interrupt you constantly and cause you to lose your train of thought and cause you to say, well, I guess I can't ask that question. Why can't I ask that question? I want to know where that man went to school. If he went to school in some subversive school, you know, like Harvard or Princeton, I want to know it. But if he went to Brigham Young, I want to know that too. And I've got a right to know. See what I can do to you? I can just sit here and preach you a sermon about anything. I can talk about blue ties. I can talk about the hair on my arm. Would you like to listen to me talk to you about the hair on my arm for the next 15 minutes? And that's where you've got to get. Because now From now on, when you get in that courtroom, you know it's time to put up or shut up. You've got to be able to say something. And what you say has to have quality to it also. See, I illustrated the blue tie scenario, not because that's ever going to come up, because that's trite, trivial diatribe. But when you're sitting over here talking about, and this will come up, trust me, all these questions are all on the juror's question and answer sheet. Yeah, that's what they're going to do. And then that eliminates 10 questions, you see, and then you've got to get right into, do I look like I'm guilty? And you don't even know whether this guy's from Podunk, New Jersey, and not every question is asked on that jury selection sheet anyway, and then you don't get a good feeling, and then you get nervous, your heart starts to beat, and you start to perspire, and your underarms start to perspire, and then you start to stink, and then you need a shower, and then everybody's mad at you because you've got bad breath or something like that, and you know, and the whole day gets started off wrong. The day gets started off right there with the jury selection. And it gets started off right there with the first juror. That prosecutor and that judge are used to picking juries in 45 minutes. I don't think I could find out whether or not this guy is from Idaho in the first 45 minutes. And if this guy keeps interrupting me over here and causing me to lose my train of thought and forcing me to go back to question one, and maybe at some point in time the judge says, well, I'm not going to do this, and I'm going to ask all the questions. When he gets through asking all the questions, you know, I've seen this happen. So the judge starts asking questions of the jury. Pretty soon they pick 6 jurors for you. They have to ask you this question. Do you accept the jury as it's impaneled? Oh, you mean those 6 people are the jury? Yeah, Mr. Gordon, that's the jury over there. Do you accept the jury as it's impaneled? No. No, I don't. In fact, that jury is a government jury. And it's obvious it's a government jury. You picked them. I didn't pick those people. I never, used my preemptory challenges. I never exercised my rights in here to pick a jury of my peers. You didn't ask those people where they went to school. You didn't find out whether or not those people sitting over there are communists and subversives, and whether they're anti-Constitution, and whether or not they're going to find me guilty because of my political and religious beliefs. You never asked a single question over there of any of those jurors as to whether or not my religious beliefs might interfere or come into question here and might prejudice them in some way when they find out that I'm one of those Moonies. You know, you ask questions of it. You really want to shock a juror. You say, would it upset you to know that I'm a communist? You talk about a shock. Yeah, would that make you angry? Are you a communist? No. Do you support communist organizations and causes? You see? Now, they're going to jump up and claim that that's not relevant, but I'll tell you what made it relevant. The very first question you asked would be, when you laid the foundation, would it be offensive to you if you knew that I was a communist? I didn't tell the guy I was a communist. Notice how I worded the question, would it be offensive to you? And if the guy says yes, I want to move this juror off for cause, Your Honor, because of his political beliefs. Now the rest of them think you're a communist, right? I don't have to sit there and explain to these guys I'm not a communist. What I'm going to do is ask questions that are designed for the sheer purpose of bumping that fellow off there for cause. I'm looking to bump 13 people off that jury and adjourn the proceedings until tomorrow. If I can, I'll bump 13 jurors a day off that jury every day for the next 3 months. 6 months. We'll be there until the halfway point of the millennium before we pick a jury. And it isn't because I'm an obstinate sort of fellow, or because I'm deliberately trying to cause a lot of heartache or a lot of agony for the court or anybody else. I've already told these people what my position is. They already know that I'm not guilty. They already know I'm not a person required to have a driver's license. I've explained it to them and told them time after time and over again. So I figure that if they can just use the law to maliciously harass and persecute me, What's good for the goose is good for the gander. Any case important enough for my government to prosecute is important enough for me to defend. Don't you ever forget that. You just keep that right up here in your head every time you ask a question of that jury panel. Now let's go on down to some more technical questions as we go along. I'm going to show you some more tricky things here. People, when they get on a jury, oftentimes have got 3 kids at home, and maybe they're losing time off from work. And the jury, he's sitting there saying, well, notice question number 23. Do you have time to serve on this jury? He'll always say, well, yes, I've got time to serve. And where do you work? Well, I work at, Shakey's Pizza or wherever it is. And you start asking questions about his work. Do they give you time off for jury duty? Yes. And do they pay you for the jury duty? Yes. Well, now you found out that he's a paid juror, haven't you? He can sit there and he's not going to be bummed out a bit. He doesn't care whether you're there a week, 2 weeks, or 3 months. But what happens if you find a fellow that, well, I just got this job and I'm working over at Hank's Tire Shop. How long have you worked there? 4 days. Oh, I see. You've been there for 4 days. And what did your boss say when you were called for jury duty? Well, he wasn't too happy. Your boss wasn't too happy? Now you zero in on the economic questions. Have you got your house payments paid? Are you caught up on your bills? And if the prosecutor, remember, every time I ask a question, I've got to be prepared to defend it. So don't ask a question unless you're prepared to take 5 minutes and explain it. Now, why would I be interested in whether or not the man's mortgage payment was paid if he'd only had a job for 4 days or 4 months? Well, because if he lost his job, it would affect his ability to, for 2 or 3 days, Mr. Jones over here is going to vote with the majority, guilty or innocent, and therefore I demand that he be bumped from the jury as a matter of cause. And that's your argument. Now, if the judge says, well, no, I don't think so, I'm going to leave him on there. Write Jones down, because one of 2 things. You're going to bump him with one of your preemptory challenges, or if you leave him on there, you're going to scream like a gut-shot banshee, I told you Jones had 2 mortgage payments. I told you he's behind on his alimony. I questioned the man during voir dire. It was clear in the record that the man was unqualified to sit, that he was in a panic and in a hurry. He didn't have the time. He was afraid of losing his job. And it becomes an appealable issue. And the only reason that when I file an appeal that I only claim 25 appealable issues is because I was unable to create 50. And so while I'm sitting here questioning Jones, I'm creating a reversible error issue. I want a juror to sit on that jury who's unqualified. I want a juror on there that I challenge for cause and say it's obvious that the man is prejudiced against me because he said he hated all bald, fat, middle-aged men. And I said to the judge, it's obvious I'm bald, I'm fat, and I'm middle-aged. I want you to take him off of there. No, we're going to leave him on there. See? Oh, okay. There's appealable issue number 48. Prejudiced juror. Every juror that you're interviewing and that you're looking at over there is a potential reversible error for numerous reasons. The entire jury panel is a reversible error issue. Think about this for a jury panel. Let's suppose you get to the end here and you got your 6 jurors over here, and all 6 of them have driver's licenses. Do you accept the jury, Mr. Gordon? No, Your Honor, I don't. And the reason that I don't, and I'm glad you asked me this question, and here comes another 15-minute sermon, is because all of these jurors have driver's licenses. Now, I would contend that if 1 or 2 of them didn't have a driver's license, that we would probably have a jury panel that would be a representation of the entire community. But since the issue here, Your Honor, is the driver's license and whether or not I have one, it isn't possible for 6 jurors who all have driver's licenses to be fair and objective, because it's obvious that they all believe they have to have driver's licenses, and when I bring up the subject matter, that there are some people who don't have to have a driver's license and watch the entire proceedings grind to a halt. The judge is going to scream bloody murder with that statement. The prosecutor is going to be on his feet. I've just prejudiced the whole jury panel in my favor. I just told them all over there I don't have a driver's license, and you guys over there ought to know that there isn't a requirement for everybody to have one. And that's what they didn't want that jury to hear. I was never going to get that in as a piece of evidence. See what I did? And when the judge really just reams you out and chews you up and spits you out, oh, I'm terribly sorry, Your Honor. I didn't know I did anything wrong. Please excuse me and see what you do? You got to be wise as a serpent and harmless as a dove. It's no biblical proverb. I don't have to go in there and let everybody know everything I know. Do you go out and tell everybody how much money you have in the bank? Or do you, if somebody says, well, how much money have you got in the bank? Well, I've got enough. How much money do you make every month? Well, I don't want to tell some bill collector I make $10,000 a month. And he knows, well, where do you work? Well, I work over here at the Jones Company. Give him all the information so he can go over there and attach your wages. And come on, a little common sense goes a long way. Well, why shouldn't common sense work in the courtroom? Why don't we go into the courtroom and use our heads and say, how can I create reversible error? You learned how to do it at the scene of the crime. When you're standing in the jail cell and you're wondering, well, what do I do next? You take your underwear off and wash your face with it. Is there some reason why I'm being denied the basic necessities of life? You create the issue. So when you're talking about the jury, you're there to create the issue. Okay? Let's go on and ask a few more of these pertinent questions. In this last hour and a half, what we want to cover are two basic subjects now that are crucial to your case when it goes to the jury. Now, the first item that I want to cover here is the prosecutor, when he's talking, or when he's voir diring, he'll be questioning the jurors. And then the second item is when you voir dire that juror. So I've got Joe Sixpack sitting over here, and we're going to go through the exercise of voir dire, or questioning a juror, to find out whether or not we can bump that juror for cause, or whether we're going to pick up something from that juror that will make us want to use one of our preemptory challenges and bump him because we don't like him. Now, as an example, let's say you're on a drug case, and here's the array of the jurors sitting back here, and there's 18 of them. Of the 18 jurors that are sitting there, you can see 3 60-year-old to 70-year-old ladies who look like retired school teachers. You find 3 or 4 other people in there that are middle-aged. And you see 3 people in there who have long hair, beards, one of which is wearing a motorcycle jacket that says Hell's Angels on the back. Can you figure out which of those jurors you want on a drug charge jury? All right? I think we want the 3 fellows that look like they're obvious drug users or drug pushers or people that know something about it. And the same thing is true on any subject matter that we're going to cover. If you're in a driver's license case and you're talking about the big 3, it's obvious that you want a fellow who's going to say, no, I don't have a driver's license, and I don't think anybody should have a driver's license. But if the juror says that, then the prosecutor is going to bump him. So let's take a look at the big 3 as an example. The driver's license, registration, and proof of insurance, and I'll act out the part of the prosecutor, and I'm going to ask a few questions of Joe Sixpack over here concerning the state's concerns about Joe's qualifications. Would you say, was your name Joe Sixpack?
Yeah, that's right. I'm Joe Sixpack.
Joe? Now, Joe, the traffic laws are for the protection of all of us, and each and every one of us, whether we like it or not, from time to time will get a ticket. I got a ticket last week, and gosh, I had to come in and pay a $40 fine, and I really didn't like that. And let me ask you a few questions here. Now, I'm not trying to be offensive in any way, Joe, and I'm not prying into your private life. And if I appear to be prying, why, please forgive me, and I'm very sorry, and I certainly wouldn't want to do that for the world. Would you tell us, Joe, have you ever gotten a ticket?
Yeah.
Well, most of us get tickets from time to time, don't we?
Yeah.
What did you get a ticket for, Joe?
Well, about 3 years ago, I got one for speeding.
Oh, I see. And did you dispose of the ticket amicably? Were you satisfied with the results?
Yeah, I went in and I paid the fine.
Oh, I see. So you recognized that you'd committed a little infraction and you paid the penalty, and you're pretty happy with the outcome. Is that right, Joe?
Well, really, I wasn't watching what I was doing very well, and I didn't really know that I was speeding when I was speeding. But that's the law. I was speeding, I guess, and I didn't know any better, and going downhill and what have you. And I wasn't watching too close. And besides, I had a nice-looking girl beside me, and I wasn't really watching the road that well.
Well, it happens to all of us, Joe, and I can understand that. Now, Joe, this fellow, Mr. Johnson over here, he's been charged with no driver's license registration and proof of insurance. Let me ask you, along those lines, do you have a driver's license, Joe?
Oh, yes, sir.
And is your car registered?
Yes, it is.
And do you have insurance like the statutes and the law prescribe?
Yeah, that's right.
So you're a law-abiding citizen then?
I try to be.
Okay, Joe, and now, when the officer gave you the ticket 3 years ago, did he treat you in a professional and a courteous manner?
Oh, yes.
And were you satisfied with his professional and courteous handling and dispatch of your ticket?
Well, I just assumed he wasn't around at the time, but since he was, I didn't have any problems with him.
Oh. Well, I think with that, Your Honor, we'll pass this juror for cause. All right, now, here's what you've got. You've got Joe Sixpack. He's got a driver's license, registration, proof of insurance. He had a ticket 3 years ago. He's a perfect slave. He does everything he's told. And here you're arguing your position that you don't have a driver's license, registration, or proof of insurance, and you're going to have to sell this fellow on the idea that maybe there are some people who are exempt from that statute or that law. And with this type of an attitude, I would use my peremptory challenge if I couldn't bump him for cause. All right, now let me, the defendant in this case, question Joe, and let's see if we can get some kind of a comment or a statement out of Joe that would show prejudice or bias or a preconceived notion or idea and get Joe bumped from the jury. And that would start off something like this. As soon as the prosecutor has said, I'll pass this juror for cause, the judge is going to come back and say, Mr. Gordon, would you like to question this juror? Thank you, Your Honor. Yes, I would. Mr. Sixpack, is your name spelled S-I-X-P-A-C-K?
Just P-A-K.
S-I-X-P-A-K.
Yeah, that's correct.
Are you married, Joe?
Yes, I am.
Do you live here in Boise?
Mm-hmm.
How many children do you have, Joe?
3.
And 3 children? Are you a native of Idaho?
Yes.
What do you do for a living at this time, Joe?
I drive a beer truck.
Uh-huh. How long have you been driving truck?
About 10 years.
And who do you work for, Joe?
I work for Coors.
Did you finish high school?
Well, yeah, I finished high school. I didn't graduate, but I got my GED.
Oh, I see. Did you do that in the service?
Yeah, I did.
And how long did you spend in the service, Joe?
3 years.
Did you go to college when you got out, or have you done any other academic studies and taken any night courses or classes or advanced your education anyway?
No.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever served on a jury before, Joe?
No, it's my first time.
Okay. Well, Joe, do you know anything about sitting on a jury?
No, just what we've been briefed.
Did you receive any education or instruction while you were in high school concerning juries and courtroom procedures of any kind?
No, I don't remember any.
Did you have any kind of a courtroom procedure while you went to high school, like when you threw a candy wrapper on the grounds? Did some monitor come over, and did you have any kind of a court procedure in that high school?
No.
Nothing, huh? Do I look like I'm guilty, Joe?
I don't know.
If a man doesn't have a driver's license, doesn't that tell you that he's guilty of something?
Well, I guess if he wasn't driving, he wouldn't have to have a license.
But if a guy is going to drive, he has to have a license. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's right.
And if he didn't have a license, he must be guilty.
Yeah, that would probably be true.
Let me ask you another question. You mentioned that you had an automobile or a driver's license. How much driving do you do privately? I mean, off of your beer truck?
Oh, on a daily basis?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I go to from work and the store once in a while, and maybe the mountain on weekends and things like that. I don't know. During the week, I don't do that much because I'm behind the truck, so maybe half an hour in the morning and a half an hour in the evening, and then on weekends, maybe a couple hours or 3.
Do you drive 10,000, 15,000 miles a year privately?
Gee, I don't know. I just have to figure that up. I don't know. If I took a vacation, I might drive some more miles.
Do any of your friends drive?
Oh, yeah, everybody drives.
Do you know of anybody that drives without a driver's license?
No.
Would you drive without a driver's license?
I don't think so, not knowingly anyhow.
Joe, since I was arrested, doesn't that tell you I must have done something wrong?
Well, the policeman stopped and did something, he must have had some reason to stop him.
Well, it's pretty obvious that if I was arrested, I must have done something. Now, wouldn't you agree with that?
Yeah, that's probably true. He must have done something wrong and he wouldn't stop.
Your Honor, I think with this last question, there's been 2 or 3 questions, I think, that show that Mr. Sixpack, while he may be sincere, is obviously biased and prejudiced, has already contended or conceded that a person who's arrested must have done something wrong. Therefore, since I've been arrested, his mind is already biased toward me. And I think the other question had to do with the driver's license. He believes that anyone who drives without a driver's license must be breaking the law. So for these reasons, I'd like to challenge Mr. Sixpack for cause. Okay. Now you'll notice that I asked Joe maybe 10 or 15 questions. The 10 or 15 questions that I asked, to that moment in time, the judge is going to give me a decision. He's going to say, no, I'm not going to disqualify Mr. Sixpack for those reasons. Now you've already prejudiced Mr. Joe Sixpack, or he may be angry with you, and he may want to vote against you if he's selected for the jury and you don't preempt him. Or as you get to the end and the jury is selected, when the court asks, do you accept this jury as it's impaneled? The answer is no. I do not accept this jury as it's impaneled because there are 2 or 3 people, and specifically Mr. Sixpack, who I consider to be prejudiced against me or that have some kind of an inherent bias. Now, challenging the array of the jury panel when they come in is one tactic that you can use. Challenging each and every juror is another tactic, and then challenging the final petite jury as it is seated is a third. And for any of those causes, you have an opportunity for reversible error or trial de novo. And remember, in the jury selection process, you're actually after a reversible error issue. And as I'm sitting here questioning Joe, remember, I've got 84 questions here in front of me. And I'm going to ask him 25 or 30 of those, or 40, before I challenge him for cause. Now, did you notice that when I acted that portion of the voir dire out, the state just asks 4 or 5 questions. The key question would be, if Joe said, I don't have any driver's license and I don't see any reason why a person in some circumstances would need one, the state then would want to challenge him First, for cause, and then secondly, they would use one of their preemptory challenges. The state, remember, has all of the advantages when they're picking the jury members. And some of the reasons for that is that the citizens do not understand jury nullification. And if you'll notice, I didn't even ask Joe if he understood jury lawlessness or jury nullification. Those are questions that I would have thrown in as the ringers. Now remember, as I've said earlier, you have certain ringer questions, and in this particular case, the ringer question is, well, since I was arrested, it's obvious that I must have done something wrong. Wouldn't you agree, Joe? And he said, well, yeah, you must have done something. If you're selected for a jury and you're asked one of those ringer questions, it'll be up to you to say, no, it doesn't necessarily mean you're guilty. I'll have to listen to the facts before I can make a determination. One of the more important things that you're going to learn from these 6 hours of the jury questions, or these 2 jury lessons, is how to make yourself a better juror, and how to explain to friends and other people that you come into contact with the purpose for the jury. You're not going to change the jury system overnight. It took Red Beckman in Montana several years to get 200,000 or 300,000 people in that state to understand the doctrine of jury nullification and the fact that the jury has a right to try the law as well as the facts. Now, one of the ringer questions would be, do you understand jury lawlessness? He'll probably go, jury lawlessness? What a ridiculous question. And the prosecutor's going to jump up and scream bloody murder. He's going to object simply because he doesn't want a jury that knows that the jury has a right to try the law. He wants a jury of 16-year-old schoolgirls chewing bubble gum who don't know which end is up or why, and who believe that everyone acts as privileged. They're still living at home, and they're still living under mom and dad, and they don't understand the subject of rights. Now, you want mature people if you're a mature person, but if you're a young person, you want young people. People identify with one another. As I said in an earlier lesson, when you're in Utah, you're probably going to have a jury filled with Mormons, and if you've got a drug case, you can ask as a matter of voir dire. Let's just take as an example a jury case where you've got drugs. Well, you know, Mormons don't believe in even drinking coffee or taking drugs and pills and drinking alcohol. And you want to ask questions. You see, you can't ask the man, are you a Mormon? What you ask the man is, well, what are your views or what are your feelings? How do you feel about? See, the purpose for the voir dire now, remember this, it's important now, the reason is qualification of the juror. Not what his religion or his politics are, because you can't ask that, but you can find that out. How do you feel about drug abuse? Oh, I'm really against drug abuse. I think that's terrible. Okay. Well, he's probably not a hippie kid then selling dope on the street. Hell's Angel. Do you drink coffee? Somebody's liable to object over here because that's such a direct question. You know, do you drink coffee? That the prosecutor may go into a long tirade because he knows exactly what you're after. So why don't you rephrase the question and say, well, how do you feel about stimulants? Well, I don't take them myself. How do you feel about sleeping pills? Well, I don't use them myself. Well, how do you feel about alcohol? Well, I don't use alcohol myself. How do you feel about smoking? Well, I don't smoke myself. Well, now, what does that tell you about this person? He doesn't use anything like drugs or narcotics. And so here you are, you know, maybe a marijuana user, which millions of people are. You don't want that fellow on the jury, but now you want to disqualify him. You want him to make a statement that would show bias or prejudice. So far, he hasn't done that. He's simply shown that, well, I'm not a person who uses alcohol. I'm not a person who uses cigarettes. I'm not a person who uses drugs. Okay? Now the ringer would be, well, since I've been arrested on a drug charge, doesn't that tell you I must be guilty of something? Yes. Okay, now you've got him. See, he's made up his mind that you've been arrested on drugs. I'm opposed to drugs. I think drugs are bad. I think drugs have to be stamped out. And for that reason, well, certainly the police, when they arrest somebody for drugs, they must have done it correctly. All right. Now remember, our position in life isn't to justify drugs, the use of it, or not the use of it, or abortion, or right to life, or driver's licenses or no driver's licenses, or taxes or not taxes. What we're talking about here are legal questions, and the way that you voir dire a jury is a legal matter. It's a matter of law. It's a matter of procedure, and you have a right to do that. And if you fail to exercise all of your rights, you waive them. I've seen jury panels selected like this. In other words, I'd never be able to pick a fair jury anyway. Everybody in Boise is a government worker, and they're all pro-government. There's no reason to ask that juror any questions. Now what you've done is you've prejudiced every member out there in the array of the jury or the jury panel against you by your bad attitude. If you aren't going to voir dire, you're not going to cross-examine. No, I don't think I'm qualified to test these people or to pry into their private lives. I think I'll just trust the good judgment of these good citizens of Ada County. I mean, you see, there's a statement that while you're saying I'm not going to get into any technical questions pursuant to the jury, at least you haven't turned them against you in some way.